I'm in the Carse of Balquhiderock, which is just beyond the town of Stirling. Stirling Castle is way over that way, the Wallace Monument away to the northeast there, and the Water of Forth, the magnificent and mighty River Forth, is away behind the knoll there. The English crossed the Bannockburn in 1314 on the first day of the battle. They camped here in this Carse. Now, contrary to popular belief, the Carse is not a bog. I am standing on hard ground here. But why this Carse is unique is that it is an enclosed Carse. It is enclosed by the Bannockburn, which is over this way, and it is also enclosed by the Pell Stream over that way. The shortest point between the Bannockburn and the Pell Stream is 830 yards. Now, this is important. In wet weather, these undulations in the ground that you can see here, they fill with water because the water table is high. It's unable to drain into the River Forth, and so it is a perfect camping ground for an army. They have water for their horses, they have water for themselves. It's an excellent camping ground for miles around, but it was also a death trap. So the English camped here. The mound that you can see up behind me here is known as the Knoll. It's 60 feet high at its highest point. This is where King Edward II and his commanders bivouacked for the night. Now, this was a planned camp. The English had been here before. They'd been here in 1298, and they'd also been here at the Siege of Stirling in 1304. The English felt secure in their camp. They were an overconfident army. After all, they'd beaten the Scots on numerous occasions. In the more recent battle in 1298 at the Battle of Falkirk, where they decimated William Wallace and his army. Why would they expect an attack? Early on the morning of the second day, the Scots were told to get up early. Now, they had camped on the Dryfield that night. The Scots had prevented English entry into the Dryfield. What you can see way behind me there is Balquhiderock Wood. Now, in those days, the wood stretched right down to the Carse floor, some 400 yards from here. The Scots made their way down through the wood. They would have been shadowed by the wood. This is dawn. This is very early in the morning, and the English partied the night before. It was said by their chroniclers, and there are more than a few of them, that they were drinking, vomiting up their drink, and they were crying "drink hail and wassail" in celebration. They came here for a fox hunt. Robert the Bruce was a rebel. They came here to put this rebellion down in open battle once and for all. Now, early that morning, there was arguments up there on the knoll between King Edward, Gloucester, Hereford, Umfraville. They were arguing. Gloucester wanted to rest his troops. After all, they'd already had a day of fighting, and they'd had a long, weary march from Falkirk up here. When they eventually saw the Scots army approaching, they approached in 3 great divisions of infantry. They all fought on foot. There was no cavalry or horses in Robert the Bruce's army that day. Now, James Douglas held the ground just over here, and this is significant. This is what would open the fighting. The wings were slightly ahead of the centre. Bruce was in the centre, and Randolph, the Earl of Moray, closed the far side. Those woods that you can see just along there were not there then. Now what we're going by are the earliest maps of 1750 and 1746. General Roy himself, and he's recorded on his maps this knoll and the presence of the pools. There can be as many as 34 pools here in very wet weather, so ideal camping ground. By the time they saw the Scots approaching, Gloucester recognised this, and he saw it was a panic. They were running to close off the Carse, closing it off. So if you have 3,000 heavy cavalry and you have an 830-yard distance, the Scots close that off. One knight to a yard, it's going to be greatly congested, and the knights are not going to be able to mobilise themselves effectively, which is what heavy cavalry charges relied upon. Gloucester, seeing this, got on his horse, didn't even wear his emblems, didn't even wear his helmet, grabbed a sword, charged the Scots division under Douglas, and he was killed, brought down and killed. It said he was pierced by many wounds right over there, round about where that hedge is. Robert the Bruce was in the centre division, roughly where you can see that pylon. Moray would be on the other side of those trees that you can see in front of you there. It's said that the English mounted in great alarm. They'd had their horses bitted and harnessed that night. There was confusion. They watched Gloucester fall to his death right over there, and so they charged the pikes. Now you would need at least 15,000 pikemen to stop a heavy cavalry charge here across 830 yards. It says the Scots were great in number. It was like charging into a dense forest, and that forest was impenetrable. It held firm. So the knights charged. They all mounted in great alarm. They raced towards the Scots, but they were unable to get up their maximum momentum, and they were halted. Roughly where you see that hedge there, that is the Scots' front line. So there was jamming for a while. They were unable to move until the Scots brought down the knights, killed the horses, and gradually stabbed and hacked their way forward through the English army. Meanwhile, King Edward II is up there on the knoll, watching the disintegration of his army. His archers came into play, but when they could only shoot in a high parabola, and what happened is they shot their own men in the back, and they were told to stop shooting. So they were ineffective. Eventually, the Scots broke through and a rout took place. The English panicked. They looked towards the south there, towards the Great Bend and the Bannockburn, and they attempted to cross it. Many were killed on the way there. They were killed in the burn. They either drowned or were killed when they were trying to cross. A few would have made it to safety, only to be hunted down further on. But this is the site of the English camp. No sources say that the English ever made it out of their camp. So when the Scots came down from Balquhiderock Wood there, that early sunrise, it would have taken them 4 or 5 minutes to cross this Carse before they were noticed. King Edward was reported to say, "Will yon Scots fight?" He was mistakenly believed that they knelt for mercy. The religious chroniclers thought they were praying. What they were doing was stopping and setting the butts of their pikes into the ground, ready to receive the charge. They stopped twice. Because of the English confusion and lack of movement, the Scots moved forward again to close off more ground, dug in their pikes, ready to receive the next charge. This knoll here is around 1/4 mile long by 1/8 wide. Perfect location for the king and the commanders to oversee their whole army. That's why they were able to see the Scots, because they were camping on the high ground up here. And this knoll is in the earliest maps of Miller and General Roy. King Edward would be led off here once Robert the Bruce's centred division, just where those ponies are, were closing in on him. Henry de Beaumont, Giles de Argetan would see the king off to safety. Argetan would return to the battle saying, "I'm not accustomed to run," and he would join the fight and be put down and lose his life shortly thereafter. But this was a perfect ground for the English camp. But because they were enclosed, the Pell stream away over that way, which was a formidable stream in its time, and the Bannockburn, just short of the A91 over there, it was a bottleneck. It was a death trap. And because of the arrogance of the English army, being drunk the night before, expecting a fox hunt of rebels in the morning, never expecting that the Scots would march boldly on them and take the fight to them, it would prove to be their very undoing. King Robert the Bruce led his army, the central division, which was slightly behind the left and right wings, a pincer movement up through here and towards the knoll there. Now the English camp would not have come further than here. This pond is omnipresent. It's on all the ancient maps right back to 1746, so we must assume that this was here in 1314. It's an invariant for the period. So all around here would have been the English camp. Why would the camp stop here? The reason is that those woods yonder, Balquhiderock Wood, which were more extensive then, stretched down onto the Carse floor, that the English camp had to be out of bowshot of the wood, just in case the Scots did try something in the English minds. They would never fathom in the month of Sundays that the Scots were going to march boldly on them and take the fight to them. But this is where the central division would have been. Now Bruce's men would either gone through this pond or around it. But the cavalry charge would have halted just at the other side of this pond here. All along there, where Douglas's division was on the right hand side, that's where Gloucester was unhorsed and taken. King Edward II, watching all of this from the knoll in complete and utter disbelief, watching as his elite army was being cut to pieces and his heavy cavalry were rendered ineffective simply because they did not have the room to maneuver. Bruce knew that. These woods here, directly in front of me, were not here. You can see that white house just over there. This would be Thomas Randolph, the Earl of Moray. He would have marched his men up there on the left wing and towards the other side of the knoll there, cutting that off from the English. We're not that far looking that way from the Pell Stream, but Edward would have had a good view of Bruce advancing on him, cutting his way through the ranks. There would have been a pile of dead horses, knights unable to move in their armour. They were cut down and killed also. There were probably many knights lying in this pond, either floating or struggling during the last moments of their life. But this was the centre. This was Robert the Bruce's division, where he led the whole army on foot, with him at the head of his army. It's said that when the English cavalry charged the Scottish ranks, that there was a terrible crash of spears and destriers wounded to the death. It must have been complete and utter carnage as the pike formations held their ground and impaled the horses. The pikes, of course, would break. They were made to do that, to break and halt the charge. And so many massed pikemen, there had to be a mass of pikemen to be able to absorb that charge, because even if you killed the rider and the horse, a dead horse or a horse that was impaled on numerous pikes at speed would plough right through you. So there was obviously some damage in the front Scottish ranks, but not a lot. It would take between 15 and 20 odd thousand Scots to form ranks that deep, but it must have been some experience, you know. All those beautiful specimens, all those destriers, those lovely animals, hurtling headlong into their death, almost 1,000 of them at a time, charge after charge after charge, until a great jamming together took place, and then the infantry coming from the back to see what was going on, providing no escape route for the cavalry. Complete and utter mayhem. And of course, this was Robert the Bruce's genius master plan. Once the English ranks had broken, the cavalry and infantry and the archers who couldn't get into the battle came this way. Many of them came this way. Some drowned in the Forth, way beyond the knoll there, but many of them came this way when the rout took place. And this is the great ditch that's spoken about in the English chronicles. This is the great ditch here. As you can see, it's very treacherous. In heavy rain, this can be 10, 11 foot deep at points. And you can just imagine the mass panic of people trying to get home, trying to get away from the carnage that was happening out there, and trying to cross this bridge en masse. Mass panic and confusion. You can just imagine them trying to reach and get out of the other side there, but especially when that was deep water, when you had men, horses thrashing about, chased by Scots, being speared in the back, being axed over the head from behind. Complete mass slaughter taking place. It said that the English families would mourn because they would never know the resting place of their loved ones who lost their lives here. But this was an invading army. They came to put this rebellion down and crush the Scots once and for all. But this is extremely formidable. It looks quite passive today, but nevertheless, the water source is quite heavy and quite deep in places. But this is the Bannockburn. And this is what the battle was named after.
The muddy bannock holds the nameless, whose people at home will wonder at the resting place of the missing. Bower.
This is the scant remains of the Pell stream today, before it was culverted, and it's produced this very small stream. Back in the day in 1314, way before this stream was culverted, it would have been an extremely formidable obstacle, because rivers and streams generally have wooded banks, and if the English camp had cut down any wood here along the Pell stream, it would have been, with all its loose stumps and everything, quite a formidable obstacle for the English to cross. Dangerous even. Now the road has been built up here. Normally there are quite a few pools in this field as well, but this is Randolph, Earl of Moray's side, and as you can see with the farm and everything over there, it's more of a built up area here. These woods in front of you are very recent woods. These weren't here then, and you can just see an opening over there to where Bruce's division would have been between those telegraph poles. But Moray's division, being on the left wing of that pincer movement, would have come up this way, and the knoll is directly behind those trees there, and he would have marched on Edward from this side. This is a zigzag road. It's built in a zigzag fashion to get round the pools that form in this area. You can see that this road has been built up quite a bit. Moray had quite a successful day, although a very difficult day on day one of the fighting, when he fought Robert Clifford's men with Henry de Beaumont there, where he captured Thomas Grey. But his part in the battle here, going ahead on the left, such a magnificent move by King Robert the Bruce. Such a genius move to move this ground, to form up his army in the way he formed it, to instill belief in them, and to maintain that belief by leading his army from the front. How many generals do that? His planning, his knowledge of the ground, and how he used it to defeat his enemy is remarkable. King Robert the Bruce, because he learned the hard way, you know, he is on a par with all the great military commanders of our age. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, all these people. Robert the Bruce is just as much of a genius up there. But this is a left movement. They would close off the Carse. The English would not get access over there to the Pell stream, where you can see those trees over there, and thus it would eventually seal their fate and produce the greatest triumph in the history of Scottish military campaigns. Bannockburn would live on for years, and it lives on now. When you think about the English army camped here, we're talking in the region between 20 and 25,000 men. Now the myth is that they were beaten by 5,000-6,000 Scots under Bruce. But when you walk the ground and study the ground, and you look at the amount of ground that Bruce's divisions had to cover, the English sources never mention a small army. Quite the opposite. They mention a dense army, large in number, as if a dense forest of footmen, impenetrable. There's no way that 5,000 men, or 6,000 even, could hold a cavalry charge 830 yards wide when they sealed off the Carse here, but when they created the death trap, the bottleneck. But when you think of English camping here after the first day, it was noted by the chroniclers brute, that they got drunk, that they lost their awareness, that they were haughty and puffed up with pride. And it's quite a surreal experience just to walk here, just to be here. The noises of the past are long gone. But when you soak in this atmosphere and you get a real feel for it, a real sense of place, something in your mind speaks to you. And what is now just a field that many people bypass, I mean, it's incontrovertible. It is without a doubt. When you look at all the sources, there are 13 in total. There are 14 actually, but there are 13 which are strongly reliable. It's beyond doubt that the English camp was here in the Carse of Balquhiderock because it was unique. The English would not camp in a bog. This is firm, hard ground. There are many pools of water and wet weather, and 13-14 was a wet year. Perfect for them. And the Scots marched up to the English camp. They mounted in great alarm. They were not ready. Gloucester lost his life because he was not ready, and he tried to halt the Scottish advance on the right wing under Douglas. And then the English mounted in great alarm, lacking their senses through their drink the night before. And once the rout took place, those that weren't killed in the actual fighting on the front line, they were chased down and they were killed en masse after that. And being secure that they'd camped here before, all the wagons, all the hangers-on, all the people that come with an army ready for battle, all the foreign mercenaries that came for glory, all the young knights here, that Bannockburn would live on not only in the Scottish memories as a victory, but in English memory as a complete and utter decimation and a disaster, where many young men lost their lives.
Another calamity which befell the English was that whereas they had shortly before crossed the great ditch called Bannockburn, into which the tide flows, and now wanted to recross it in confusion. Many nobles and others fell into it with their horses in the crush, while others escaped with much difficulty. And many were never able to extricate themselves from the ditch. Thus Bannockburn was spoken about for many years in English throats. Lanarcost. And many English fled so fast in fright that a great number fled to the river Forth, and there most of them drowned. And Bannockburn, between its banks, was so stuck full of men and horses that men might pass over dry shod. Barber.